The pike and shot era made war more deadly. As gunpowder weapons got more and more common from the 15th to the 17th century, the number of casualties in battles also tended to increase. Losing a battle always cost many lives, but now quite often even the victors suffered high losses. Simultaneously, campaigns became longer and soldiers served farther away from home. Some even fought overseas in the Americas, which increased the risk of dying to diseases or bacteria unknown to the immune system. As the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes noted in his Leviathan, life was, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Given all these horrifying prospects, it is not clear at all why men chose to endure the extreme hardships of battle and what, in the first place, motivated them to join the army. In this video, we will look at the reasons why men chose to become soldiers in the notorious pike and shot era. Although there may be some overlap with what motivated soldiers in other time periods, we won't generalize our findings, as there might be important nuances across time, which you can better understand if you watch The Story of Europe, hosted by no one else but the famous historian Dr. Christopher Clark. You'll find it on the site of today's sponsor, CuriosityStream. The Story of Europe is one of our favorite documentaries because it is a good starting point to get into different time periods of history. It spans across several centuries, starting with the ancient Greeks and going all the way to 1989 when the Iron Curtain fell. The documentary does a great job of giving you the bigger picture of what happened in Europe and how significant events are connected. Its host, Dr. Christopher Clark, is actually one of our favorite historians and quite famous as the author of The Sleepwalkers: How Europe Went to War in 1914. So he's not only a very pleasant host, but also a distinguished expert, which makes the Story of Europe definitely worth a watch. Of course, CuriosityStream is home to thousands of other streamable documentaries and non-fiction TV shows on topics like history, nature, science and more. To check them out, sign up to CuriosityStream using code SandRhoman for just $14.99 for the whole year. This way you get a discount and help out our channel. Now let's jump back to the video. The question, why did soldiers fight, can be understood in two ways. On one hand, it is a question about the immediate reasons which caused soldiers to choose fight over flight during battle. On the other hand, it is about what motivated soldiers on an ideological or psychological level to join the army. For now, we'll focus on the second question, why men joined the army. Before any battle could commence, an army had to be raised and normal civilians had to be convinced to pick up weapons and become soldiers. Although contemporary belief systems, values, ideologies, as well as pragmatic interests are all mentioned by historians, it is not that simple for us to understand what this means. Unlike in the First World War, when soldiers could be motivated to fight for their nation state on the basis of patriotic feelings and the promise of quick glory for one's country, men in the pike and shot age lacked such unifying ideological causes. Imagine a German Landsknecht fighting in Italy for the Spanish crown. Most likely he was illiterate. He probably did not understand the political reasons behind the war he fought in to begin with, nor did he share common traditions or common language with many Italian or Spanish men in the same army. Most likely he fought Swiss, Frenchmen, or sometimes even other Landsknechts. So, belonging to a certain group that spoke the same language or had the same tradition was not really a major reason. The historian Dennis Showalter points out where we have to look for possible reasons and motivations. For many men, military service was either a last resort or means of escape, or both. Military service also promised starving men food and poor men avenues of enriching themselves. These reasons were conjoined with other factors, such as the prospect of rich plunder, collective notions of honor, masculinity and glory, often forged within the context of group loyalty, as well as class identity and unit camaraderie. These are the factors we need to investigate further. In general, soldiers of the early modern period have a pretty bad reputation. Often, they're seen as drunken brutes who plundered their way through Europe without a moral compass. This image arose due to the horrors of the 30 Years' War, when it was better to be a plundering soldier than a plundered victim. Being part of a group of plundering soldiers was often the only option to live a somewhat secure life. But not all the soldiers of the 30 Years' War, or of the entire pike and shot age at large, entered military service out of desperation and brutish interests. Motivations varied, of course, depending on age, region, social standing, and most importantly, from individual to individual. A criminal, for example, had very different motivations to join the army than a son of a nobleman. Answering our question is, all in all, quite complicated. It makes sense, therefore, to look at the long list of possible reasons and motivations through an established model. In this case, we have decided to draw on the push-pull model to present a range of motivations of soldiers in the pike and shot era. Simply put, push factors drive men into the army, pull factors attract them to military service. Given the cruelties of war, present-day people sometimes have a hard time understanding the appeals of military service. So let's drop the biases of modern perception for a moment. Imagine an ordinary man who is a son of a smith in a small village. The chances that he was bound to work as a smith, who might never see more than a few villages and local markets around his town, was pretty big. He very much depended on his father, who would dictate most of what he could and should do. Military service was really one of the few possibilities to escape the daily grind. So some men were driven away from their homes by the desire to break out of strict hierarchies. Combine this with the desire to see the world, to experience life outside local customs, to go on an adventure and to travel, and you already have a few factors why men joined the military. Joining an army was really just a seemingly nice summer holiday for some, at least until they saw the gruesome reality of the field of battle and the sicknesses that ravaged armies in camp. But life could just be as bad in a peaceful village that suffered from famine or similar catastrophes. Keep in mind that joining the military usually didn't mean to completely abandon one's homestead. Campaigns normally started in spring and often ended in fall, so that farmers could still go home and see after their crops. If soldiers were garrisoned during winter for some reason, they had the opportunity to learn new skills such as handling horses, fixing wagons, or carpentry. Summing up, major push factors were limited opportunities of everyday life. The strict social hierarchies and various disasters that struck villages and individuals frequently, or simply put, bad circumstances at home. Pull factors, on the other hand, were things such as the seemingly better life, or at least an interesting one, that the army offered to the adventurous youth. Likewise, there was naked self-interest. Having enough food and shelter, or even making quick money by plundering either a city or a rich baggage train, was very compelling, and drew impoverished men and those from low social class into the military. In some cases, however, joining an army was pure self-preservation. The same goes for women joining an army's baggage train as camp followers. In some of the darker moments of the 30 Years' War, it was really the best way to survive. One stood a better chance of survival in a big, organized and armed group that itself plundered than to live in a small village where one would likely end up helplessly as a victim. But belonging to a group could also be a pull factor. The army could also provide a strong sense of identity. Within an army, women and men alike often formed small groups to live with and formed small households. For many, life in the army was close to having a second family. In addition, fighting furthered a strong camaraderie among the men. Another major motivator, acting both as push and pull factor, was religion. While the 15 and 1600s are known for their many religious wars, we must separate religious reasons for wars and the individual pious motivations of soldiers. Confessional disputes between Catholics and Protestants, for example, were rarely the sole or even proximate reason for war. In fact, struggles for power and authority among the ruling dynasties of Europe were often more or at least equally important. Frequently, French Catholics fought Habsburg Catholics, or during the 30 Years' War, the French Catholics supported the Protestant cause of the Swedish Gustavus Adolphus. However, religious belief systems were not irrelevant. The religious division of Western Europe following the Reformation commenced by Martin Luther added a new dimension to personal life choices and motivations, as well as political conflicts. Luther took issue with the practice of selling plenary indulgences, which were certificates believed to reduce the punishment in purgatory for sins. He wrote his 95 Theses and allegedly posted them to the door of the All Saints Church in Wittenberg. This is considered to be the beginning of Protestantism and spurred a number of religiously motivated conflicts. From then on, conflicts often gained a religious dimension besides being a struggle about class and political power. In Germany, for example, it made sense for princes to align themselves with the Protestant movement to resist the political power of their Catholic emperor by exploiting the religious conviction of the people. On the individual level of a soldier, religion could induce a spirit of righteousness, which could legitimize a soldier's fight against those with a different conviction, but it could also help them to get through the hardships of war without going insane. By many, God was seen as taking personal interest in their soul and their salvation, especially in Protestant strains. Dennis Showalter comments, quote, "In these spiritually complex worldviews, individuals believed that their behavior, acts, and even their unspoken thoughts mattered, because God knew all and judged all both here and hereafter." End quote. So going to war because of these belief systems was certainly a part of the motivation of soldiers. In summary to the question why soldiers joined the army in the first place, you could say this: the main motivators were God, glory, and gold. In his book, The Face of Battle, the distinguished military historian John Keegan repeatedly raises the question why soldiers fought when the common sense of self-preservation urges running. Again, we don't want to generalize for all periods of history, but for the pike and shot era at least, the answer is somewhat simple. Running away from the battlefield was far more dangerous than attacking. As long as a unit stood its ground, casualties could be high, but if a formation broke in the face of the enemy and fled, this could well have meant complete annihilation, because without formation, fleeing men could be easily run down with cavalry and shot in the back. So quite often the goal of an attack was not to kill the enemy in combat, but to scare them just enough so they start running. Battlefield discipline, in short, was a survival mechanism, far better than the instinctive alternatives, such as running. This attitude towards combat is best typified by the sheer bravado of the Swiss. In the beginning of the 16th century, they were some of the most sought-after mercenaries in Europe, and known for their good morale and discipline. Their tactics were rather simple. In essence, they were just better at charging enemy formations cohesively and without hesitation. If you read about them in history books, you will come across terms like the Swiss steamroller, which refers to their offensive shock charges. However, the Swiss way of war ended abruptly as firearms became more and more common on the battlefields. At the Battle of Bicocca in 1522, for example, they simply got shot to pieces by the Spanish before they could even meet the Landsknechts who served the Spanish. Over the course of the 16th century, this happened more and more frequently. With the adoption of mass firearms, the bravado of a medieval charge had to give way to self-discipline. The historian Dennis Showalter comments, quote, "Courage became increasingly to be defined as what might be called conspicuous steadiness, taking position in front of one's formation and showing insouciant indifference to risk." So, in contrast to the medieval admiration of knightly bravado displayed by a charge on horseback, or indeed on foot as in the case of the Swiss, the pike and shot era demanded soldiers to remain stoic, steadfast, and most importantly, in formation while facing waves of musket and artillery fire. If you want to get a good impression how this could have looked like, then watch the movie Alla Triste. Its costume design and general presentation are probably the best display of early modern Europe on television. Remaining steadfast and disciplined went hand in hand with many new battlefield tactics such as the countermarch. Depending on where and when it was used, it could look differently, but in general, this term refers to soldiers standing in line, shooting and marching in the other direction to reload. This was one of the main fire drills used in the 16th century. In the same vein, cavalry frequently abstained from charging home with sabers or lances, but instead rode close to the enemy in waves to shoot their pistols. Such maneuvers required another sort of bravery, as the men often had to receive enemy fire without discharging their own weapons because they were still reloading or waiting on the order to fire. Such maneuvers required extensive drill and discipline, which consequently became an essential element of soldiers' lives in peacetime. Eventually, this would pave the way for standing armies, but that's a topic for another video.